The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, smug, cruel, and careless. "They're just kids. Half of them can't even tell the difference." They were said within earshot of a man they never should have underestimated. No suit, no entourage, just a 55-year-old man in a worn denim shirt, holding a warm slice of blueberry crumble. The same crumble that made his family's name famous. From the outside, it looked perfect. Golden brown topping, hint of cinnamon, comforting aroma. But with one slow scoop, the filling oozed out. Thin, cloyingly sweet, unnaturally purple. He took a bite, and everything stopped. "I know that recipe. That isn't it. That's not blueberry crumble. That's a compromise in a dish." He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just pulled out his phone and started documenting, because this wasn't just a bad batch. This was a cover-up. Someone was about to get exposed. A fake ingredient, a fake supplier, a fraud so big it stretched across multiple states, all hidden beneath a crumble no one thought the boss would ever taste. But he did. And now he's coming for everyone involved. Have you ever eaten something familiar and instantly realized something wasn't right, but no one else seemed to care? Arthur Sterling tugged his newsboy cap lower as he stepped through the front doors of the Hearth and Home Bakery in Portland, Oregon. The faint, sweet smell of yeast and fruit floated in the air, but something felt off. The rustic wooden display case had smudges on its glass, and the quaint checkered counters bore sticky rings that should have been wiped clean hours ago. Behind the register, a young man leaned against the pastry rack, scrolling on his phone, oblivious. For most customers, it would have been nothing. An off-shift, a minor lapse. But Arthur wasn't most customers. He was the man whose family name sat etched in every Hearth and Home location across the country. From a single farm stand to a national brand with over 500 locations, he'd built this from scratch. But this particular franchise, the one in Portland, had been flashing yellow on his regional reports for weeks. Margins too high, costs too low, and yet no complaints, no red flags from the local team. It didn't add up. "Just a slice of the classic blueberry crumble," Arthur said, keeping his tone casual. He handed over a $10 bill and noted how the cashier barely looked up, punched the keys with one hand, and slid his change across the counter with the other. No smile, no eye contact, and certainly no "Welcome to Hearth and Home," the greeting every employee was trained to give. Strike one. He carried his receipt to a cozy corner table near the window. From there, he could observe the floor and kitchen pass through while blending into the afternoon crowd. His disguise, comfortable jeans, a simple plaid shirt, and reading glasses had worked in 4 other cities. No one gave him a second glance, not even when the young man called out, "Order number 33. Arthur stood and picked up his tray. The stoneware plate held a neatly portioned slice of blueberry crumble, golden brown streusel topping, a dusting of powdered sugar, and a scoop of freshly whipped cream on the side. On the surface, it looked like what he'd spent 35 years perfecting in his grandmother's kitchen. But the smell was off, subtle but unmistakable to someone who knew the real thing. He sat down, and with practiced hands, slid his spoon cleanly through the crumble. The topping gave way, and the filling slowly spread outward. Arthur leaned in. No plump blueberries, no natural juices, just a viscous, overly sweet goo, a synthetic shade of purple. He frowned. The filling should have had robust, bursting berries with a slight tartness, a blend of warm spices. This was thin, artificial, almost jelly-like. He took a bite. Immediately, his taste buds recoiled. The sweetness was sharp, chemical. The aftertaste lingered, artificial and unpleasing. It wasn't just off-brand, it was fraudulent. Arthur had tasted every batch of that crumble since he was 20. He could have identified it blindfolded. This wasn't his product. He forced himself to chew, swallow, and set the spoon down. Then, with steady fingers, he lifted the plate from the tray. Beneath it, Tucked partially under the napkin was a small printed label, likely meant for internal, kitchen use. It read, "Product Blueberry Filling, Evergreen Provisions, Inc." His eyes narrowed. Evergreen Provisions wasn't on the company's approved vendor list. Hearth & Home had two nationwide suppliers for fruit fillings, both regional farms that used fresh seasonal produce, not processed syrup. Every franchise owner knew this. It was in bold print in the training manual and outlined explicitly in the franchise agreement. Substitutions, especially unapproved bulk ingredients, weren't just a breach. They were grounds for immediate review. His phone buzzed, a text from Clara, his VP of Operations, who'd helped coordinate this undercover visit. "How's the crumble?" Arthur replied without hesitation. "Fake. Check everything we have on Evergreen Provisions, Inc." 3 dots appeared, then, "That's not one of ours. Never heard of them." Arthur stared at the crumble again, his expression darkening. This wasn't a fluke or a lazy shortcut. This was calculated. A decision. Someone had swapped out the one product that defined the brand and hoped no one would notice. They were wrong. He noticed. And if you're starting to notice something too, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Sometimes all it takes is one bite to reveal the truth. Arthur took a deep breath, steadying his pulse as he slid the tampered slice of crumble back into its plate. 35 years ago, he'd stood beside his grandmother in a bustling kitchen, learning how to layer fruit just right so the filling didn't get watery. She used to say, "A good crumble tastes of truth. A dishonest one leaves a bitter aftertaste." And now here it was. A bitter aftertaste served on company stoneware. He tucked the Evergreen Provisions slip into his pocket and scanned the dining room. The energy was hollow. Staff moved mechanically. Customers munched in silence. A faded promotional poster from 2 seasons ago hung crookedly near the restrooms. It was mid-afternoon, but the vibe felt more like closing time. Tired, unmotivated, barely functioning. Behind the counter, a young worker manned the coffee station, struggling to operate the espresso machine with one hand while chatting on her smartwatch with the other. Another teenager near the muffin display was giggling over something on a co-worker's phone. No one seemed to notice or care that Arthur was watching, which, in a way, was exactly what he needed. He leaned back in the booth, turned on his phone's voice recorder and dictated quietly, "Observed multiple health code violations, low staff engagement, possible unreported supplier substitution. Portland unit, 2:30 p.m. His eyes drifted to the back of the store, past the prep area, to a frosted glass door labeled, "Manager's Office, Keep Out." The person behind that door was the one he really needed to meet. Fiona Davis, franchisee store manager and 12-year veteran of the Hearth & Home system. Arthur had read her file that morning. Consistent performance for 9 years, but in the past year a noticeable shift. High profit, surprisingly low ingredient costs, and yet unusually quiet customer feedback. Too quiet. His phone vibrated. Again. Clara had responded. Evergreen Provisions was incorporated 6 months ago in Washington State. No prior food service history. Registered agent is Liam Davis. Arthur stared at the name for a second before replying, "Any relation to Fiona?" The answer came fast. "Her brother. I'm pulling financials now." Arthur's jaw clenched. The implications were already forming. It wasn't just a bad order. This was intentional substitution from a family-owned supplier operating outside company policy, masked by clean metrics and strategic silence. It was a shell game, and if Liam was involved, Fiona wasn't just complicit. She was orchestrating it. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass. Arthur quickly pocketed his phone, returned to sipping his water, and waited. Moments later, the office door creaked open. A short employee, maybe 20, emerged holding a clipboard and whispered something to the cashier. Their eyes darted toward Arthur. The cover was thinning. Arthur stood calmly, disposed of his tray, and approached the pickup counter. "Could I get the store phone number?" he asked casually. The young woman blinked. It's online," she mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the wall. Arthur smiled politely, pulled out his phone anyway, and typed the digits he already knew. The landline rang. Inside the office, someone picked up. A muffled voice filtered through. Arthur watched through the narrow office window as a woman in her late 40s, clad in a Hearth and Home green apron, raised the receiver with a curious frown. "This is Fiona Davis," the voice said crisply. "How can I help you?" Arthur didn't bother disguising his tone this time. "Fiona, this is Arthur Sterling. I'm sitting in your bakery. I'd like to speak with you now." There was a pause, just long enough for him to hear her inhale sharply. "Excuse me?" she said. "I'm at table 3 by the window. You've just served me a crumble with a filling from Evergreen Provisions, Inc. I don't believe that's an approved supplier. Come join me." Through the window he saw her freeze, eyes scanning, then they landed on him. Recognition hit her face like a splash of ice water. Arthur raised a hand in a small wave, calm, precise, and full of control. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," she said after a beat. "Right away." Arthur ended the call and returned to his table. His stomach wasn't turning from the fake crumble anymore. It was the quiet, burning anger of a man who'd been lied to inside his own house. He straightened the napkin beside the plates, set his phone face down in the center of the table, and waited. The filling had spilled out, and now so would the truth. Think this is just about crumble? Think again. Hit subscribe to follow the trail and share if you've ever wondered what really goes on behind the kitchen door. Fiona Davis stepped out of the office with a smoothness that would have fooled anyone else. She was composed, professional, every strand of her dark hair in place, her apron neatly tied. But Arthur had been in enough boardrooms and ambush interviews to spot the tightness around her eyes, the practiced smile that didn't quite reach them. "Mr. Sterling?" she said as she approached the table, voice calm but breath a little too controlled. "What a surprise. If we'd known—" "You didn't," Arthur interrupted, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "Sit." She obeyed, but not before glancing quickly toward the kitchen where several employees had paused mid-motion, sensing something was off. One of them whispered to another, who glanced back at the table before disappearing into the walk-in cooler. Arthur noted it all. He slid the plate of half-eaten crumble toward her. "Go on, take a bite." Fiona blinked, confused. "Sir, that crumble—" "Take a bite. You tell me what you taste." She hesitated, then picked up the spoon, scooped a small piece, and chewed. She chewed too long. "Well?" Arthur asked. "It's a little sweeter than usual, perhaps," she said carefully. "But our batches do vary slightly." "No, they don't," Arthur said flatly. "Not if they're made to spec. Not if they're made with the filling we've used since 2000. And certainly not if they're made from fresh, whole blueberries, which this isn't." Fiona folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I can assure you, Mr. Sterling, we maintain Hearth and Home standards in every aspect." He pulled the Evergreen Provisions label from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Then explain this." Her eyes flicked down, froze, then slowly lifted back to meet his. "We've had some supply chain disruptions recently," she said, almost too quickly, "especially with the rising cost of fresh fruit. Evergreen Provisions provided us with a short-term alternative at a competitive rate. Without authorization," Arthur cut in, "without informing corporate, and without updating the supplier database, which, if I hadn't looked under that plate, you would have continued hiding." "Mr. Sterling, I understand how this looks," Fiona said, her tone shifting to something firmer, more defensive. "But we've been operating under extreme constraints, logistics issues, labor shortages. Everyone is adapting. I made the call to keep the store running and avoid waste." "You made the call," Arthur echoed, "to compromise our product, our brand, My family's name. And you didn't even have the decency to tell us. Fiona straightened, her spine. It was never about deceit. It was about survival. The cost of our original filling has gone up nearly 65% since last fall. If I had stuck to the manual, I'd be operating at a loss. And instead, you've been padding your profit margin, Arthur said, his voice cool and level. Because this isn't just about one location. I've already received a breakdown showing that your numbers didn't just survive. They improved. You're spending less, reporting more, and you've done it quietly enough that no one flagged it until now. Fiona opened her mouth, then shut it again. Arthur leaned back and let the silence stretch. Every second made her more uncomfortable. "Tell me, Fiona," he said finally, "how long have you been using Evergreen Provisions products?" 5 months. And is it just the filling? She hesitated. A few other items, apple pie filling, cherry pastry filling. We've kept it within reason. You've kept it in the dark, Arthur said, correcting her. He picked up his phone and tapped the screen. The voice recorder was already running. He placed it face up on the table between them. We'll be testing the samples today. If you'd like to add any context, now's the time. Fiona's posture stiffened. Her tone cooled. I believe I'll wait to speak with legal counsel. Arthur nodded slowly. That's your right. He gathered the plate and the Evergreen Provisions slip, and slipped both into a zippered pouch. The bakery hummed behind them, but the air around the table had gone still. You'll be hearing from us again soon, he said. In the meantime, I suggest you don't change a thing. Leave the records intact. Don't warn anyone. Fiona said nothing. She only watched him as he stood, her jaw tight. Arthur turned to leave, but stopped after a few steps. And Fiona, he said over his shoulder, if you've built your profits on lies, you'd better hope they don't crumble as fast as your blueberry filling. He walked out of the bakery into the cool Portland air, slipping his phone into his pocket and his thoughts into a warpath. The crumble had cracked. The truth was leaking out, and Arthur Sterling had just taken the first bite. The hotel suite smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer toner. Arthur paced the length of the room, phone pressed to his ear, the same canvas pouch sitting unopened on the desk, the one containing the crumble slice, the printed label, and the last trace of trust he'd had in Fiona Davis. On the other end of the line, Clara was already deep into the investigation. We've got confirmation, she said. Evergreen Provisions is a shell. Paper trail leads to a P.O. box in rural Washington registered under an address linked to Davis's brother. His name is Liam. No prior food licensing, no health permits. They incorporated 7 months ago. Arthur rubbed his forehead. Which means they existed for exactly one purpose, to funnel product through the back door. There's more, Clara said. I spoke with compliance. That ingredient label you found, the code matches a rejected sample we tested last year. It had elevated levels of artificial dyes and an unapproved sweetener not cleared for commercial food. Use in the U.S. Arthur's hand froze mid-air. You're telling me Fiona's been serving crumble with a filling that wouldn't pass a basic health inspection? Yes. And based on the invoice dates, she's been doing it for at least 5 months, quietly, consistently. Arthur walked to the mini-fridge, poured himself a glass of water, and stared at the dark purple slice under plastic wrap on the desk. It looked innocuous, familiar even, but it wasn't what it claimed to be, and that made it dangerous. I want testing done, he said. Full spectrum. Composition, artificial additives, anything outside spec. Pull the lab team off whatever they're working on and get them here. I've already called them, Clara replied. ETA is under an hour. True to her word, 50 minutes later, a knock came at the door. Arthur opened it to find Dr. Ben Carter, the lead food chemist from Hearth & Home's internal quality control team, rolling in a sleek black testing unit that looked like a medical-grade suitcase on wheels. He offered a curt nod. I assume this is urgent. Arthur handed him the pouch. It's not just a substandard substitute. We think it's a manufactured filler blend from an unauthorized supplier, possibly harmful. Dr. Carter pulled on gloves and began laying out sterile slides, pipettes, and a portable mass spectrometer. He worked quickly, professionally, a man used to identifying deception in parts per million and molecular structures. Arthur stood back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the crumble as he extracted a sliver of filling and placed it under the scanner. "What are we comparing it to?" he asked. "Recipe 5.0, the same one we've used for every national distribution since 1999. Real fruit, no artificial colors, no high-fructose corn syrup." Dr. Carter tapped the screen. "Baseline loaded." They waited. The machine hummed, scans ran, data filled the screen in quiet, clinical increments. Finally, he turned the monitor toward Arthur. Two graphs appeared side by side, one for the original recipe, one for the sample. "You don't need a PhD to see this," he said. "Antioxidant levels are off by 50%. Natural fruit sugars are replaced, almost entirely by a synthetic blend, and the compound here," he tapped a glowing red flag, "is azorubine. It's banned in food products for infants and has known adverse effects in some children." Arthur exhaled slowly. "Bottom line?" he asked. "This isn't food," Dr. Carter said. "It's a chemical concoction designed to mimic fruit. And if this is what customers have been eating for months, you have a much bigger problem than just fraud." As he packed up his kit, Arthur returned to his phone. Clara had just sent another update, this one colder than the last. "We pulled merchant logs from Portland and cross-referenced them with shipping records. Our authorized suppliers haven't made a single delivery to that store in 6 months. 6 months. That meant every bite, every slice served at that location had come from a black market operation masquerading as home-style goodness." Arthur sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. He thought of the customers, families, children, seniors, people who trusted the brand to mean what it said. Homemade, quality, real ingredients, always. Instead, they'd been fed something else entirely. His phone buzzed again. "You need to see this," Clara texted. "We traced payments from Davis's store to Evergreen Provisions' bank account. Guess who signs them?" Arthur didn't need to guess. He opened the attachment and saw the scanned signature. Fiona Davis. Neat, deliberate, dozens of transactions, all structured just below the internal audit threshold. He picked up the crumble box and looked at it one more time. Same box, same topping, same rustic design. But inside, a lie. And now he knew it didn't stop in Portland. It was time to find out how deep it went. The morning mist still clung to the streets when Arthur stepped out of the Rose City Inn, now dressed in the nondescript uniform of a corporate field auditor. Charcoal gray slacks, a crisp white collared shirt, a clipboard tucked under his arm, and a freshly laminated badge clipped to his chest that read, "Compliance Officer, Hearth and Home Division." A pair of reading glasses he didn't strictly need completed the disguise. With Clara's help, he had been inserted into the store's schedule as Mr. Sullivan, an unannounced internal inspector, doing spot checks on inventory, sanitation, and product consistency. His goal wasn't to catch dust bunnies in corners. It was to find what lay beneath the crumble and who was helping hide it. As he stepped through the glass doors of the Portland location, the same faintly sweet scent greeted him. But now it felt like a cheap perfume trying to mask something foul. A young woman in her early 20s stood behind the counter, visibly flustered. "You must be Mr. Sullivan. I was told to expect you." Arthur offered a firm handshake. "That's right. I'll need access to storage, daily logs, supplier invoices. I won't interfere with service." The employee's name tag read, Chloe. She led him past the kitchen toward the back room. Arthur made note of the workers as they passed. The same faces from the day before, now stiffer, more alert. Word had gotten around. Fiona Davis wasn't in yet. Her shift started later in the morning. "All our invoices are digital now," Chloe explained as they entered the back office. "Ms. Davis keeps the paper backups in her locked drawer." Arthur sat at the desk and fired up the terminal. Clara's software had already created a backdoor into the system, masked as a routine network update, which allowed him to download every vendor entry, order history, and inventory report without triggering alerts. "You're in," Clara whispered, through the earpiece hidden in his collar. Portland's records look clean at first glance. Regular orders from Willamette Valley Farms and Cascade Fruit Co., which we know never delivered. "Correct, but those records were duplicated and meticulously swapped," Arthur muttered. "There's a hidden file tree labeled Procurement A-Side." Arthur opened the folder and found it. A parallel set of invoices from Evergreen Provisions, Inc., all paid under a dummy business unit named Local Sourcing Initiative. "They're keeping 2 sets of books," he said quietly. Clara confirmed. "I cross-referenced the timestamps. They match the gaps in corporate shipping logs. Evergreen Provisions made at least 25 deliveries in the last 6 months, all undocumented. By our system." Arthur printed a few of the falsified invoices and tucked them into his clipboard. He then asked Chloe for access to the current stock. "Need to pull visual samples of fillings, batter mixes, anything proprietary," he said. Chloe nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "Sure. Just heads up, Ms. Davis handles most of that herself." "I'm sure she does," Arthur said flatly. In the walk-in freezer, he found crates labeled in neat handwriting. Some bore Hearth & Home's official stamp. Others were plain cardboard boxes with a tiny evergreen code in the corner. He took pictures, opened one, and saw the same thin, overly sweet purple goo he'd tasted the day before, packed in clear plastic bags, unlabeled except for a faint batch number. "These were never meant for inspection," he whispered. "They're hiding them in plain sight." A few minutes later, Chloe returned with a tray. "Here's a sample of everything we have in rotation." Arthur examined the lineup: raw filling, thawed filling, baked crumble, and finished slices. He noted inconsistencies immediately: texture irregularities, color mismatches, filling that shimmered more like syrup than fruit. "How long have you worked here?" he asked casually. 10 months, Chloe said. "Transferred from Seattle when Ms. Davis got promoted here." "And have you noticed any changes in ingredients since then?" Chloe hesitated. "I'm not involved in ordering. She's pretty strict about who touches vendor stuff. But I've seen deliveries come in from some unmarked white vans that don't have our company logo." Arthur jotted it down. "If you had concerns about product quality, who would you report to?" "We're told to go directly to her. She says resolving issues internally builds team cohesion." He paused, then lowered his voice. "But one guy, Ben, used to be assistant manager, said he tried raising issues and ended up getting all his shifts cut. He quit a month later." Arthur gave a polite nod, thanked Chloe, and headed back to the office, his mind already racing. Evergreen Provisions wasn't a loophole. It was a system. Someone had designed it to run parallel to corporate processes, feeding off the brand's integrity while funneling profits quietly away. Back at the desk, Arthur pulled out his phone. Clara's voice came through, low and urgent. "You need to see this. We just flagged 3 more stores. Same invoice pattern, same fake vendor routing. All of them reporting to Davis in some form. She's not just a participant, Arthur. She's the architect." Arthur stared at the monitor, watching as another name popped up. A store in Bend, another in Salem, a third in the outskirts of Vancouver, Washington, all showing perfect profit metrics, all using Evergreen Provisions as a silent supplier. This wasn't a rogue decision. It was organized, coordinated, profitable. "She didn't just swap the filling," he said. "She swapped the entire supply chain." And now it was time to cut it open, slice by slice. The air in the employee break room was thick and cloying, as if someone had sprayed too much air freshener to cover up the faint scent of stale fryer oil. Arthur sat at the far end of the table with a clipboard balanced on his knee, the same compliance officer badge clipped to his shirt, a calm expression masking the intricate calculations firing off in his mind. Over the course of 2 hours, he'd quietly requested to speak with each member of the day shift staff, one at a time, behind closed doors. No rush, just standard procedural interviews. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. The answers were polished, too polished. No issues with suppliers. We love working here. Ms. Davis runs a very efficient store. Every sentence sounded like it had been lifted from a training manual or rehearsed. Even the tone was uniform, cautious but cheerful. A few of the more junior employees avoided eye contact altogether. Arthur thanked each of them politely, took his notes, and waited for the next. Finally, a younger employee stepped into the room, nervously twisting the edge of her apron. Her name tag read Sarah. The way she perched on the edge of the seat, backpack still half on one shoulder, told him everything he needed to know. She was new and apprehensive. 3 months, she answered, when he asked how long she'd been with the Portland store. It's my first job out of high school. And how's the training been? Arthur asked. Do you feel like everything matches what you learned in orientation? Sarah hesitated. I mean, I guess so. I don't have much to compare it to. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Sarah, anything you tell me here stays between us. These interviews are anonymous. We're just trying to get a better sense of how things really run. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. Ms. Davis, she has ways of finding things out. What do you mean? Sarah's eyes flicked to the closed door. She says everything here stays in-house, that corporate doesn't like being bothered with small stuff. And last month she made us all sign these papers, employee conduct agreements, she said, but it felt more like a warning. Do you remember what the forms said? Just that we're not supposed to discuss operations with anyone outside the store. No social media posts. No talking to customers about ingredients. No mentioning specific vendors, even to family. Arthur's pen paused mid-stroke. And what happens if someone does? Sarah swallowed. Well, Mark used to work back of house, said something once about the fruit deliveries looking off. A few days later, he was cleaning bathrooms and getting scheduled for 3 hours a week. Did he quit? He stopped. Showing up. Arthur tapped his clipboard gently, keeping his tone neutral. Do you know who delivers your fruit fillings now? Sarah nodded slowly. It's not the regular Hearth and Home truck. It's this plain white van, no logo, shows up really early Tuesday and Friday mornings. We're not allowed in the kitchen when it arrives. Ms. Davis handles it herself. Arthur leaned back, connecting mental dots faster than he could write them. Has anyone ever tried to report concerns to the company? Ben did, she said, lowering her voice further. He used to be assistant manager. Told me he called the ethics hotline once. 2 days later, Ms. Davis said he'd been transferred to a new location, but Leo in the kitchen found his uniform in the trash. Have you seen anything since then? Only that no one talks about it. Leo pretends nothing happened. Chris keeps his head down. We're just told to keep our eyes on the line and our mouths shut. Arthur stood slowly and thanked her for her time. She hesitated before leaving. Is something wrong, sir? He gave her a small smile. That's what we're here to find out. As she left, he remained seated for a few moments, staring at the notes on his clipboard. Notes that now painted a picture of quiet fear, invisible control, and institutionalized silence. A manager who intercepted complaints before they could reach corporate, employees too scared to speak, and a non-disclosure agreement designed not for legal compliance, but for intimidation. A knock at the door broke his concentration. Chris, the young supervisor from earlier, poked his head in. We've got a delivery arriving early, he said, his voice tight. One of the unmarked ones. Arthur checked his watch. It was Thursday, not a scheduled delivery day for Evergreen. "Thank you," he said, standing. "Let's see what arrives when it's not supposed to." As he followed Chris out, he passed Sarah near the service line. She didn't say a word, but the way she looked at him, wide-eyed, quietly hopeful, said enough. Someone had finally come. Someone who wasn't afraid to see what was really inside the crumble. The delivery van pulled up 10 minutes early. No logo, no uniformed driver. Just a white panel truck with dark-tinted windows and a back gate that juddered open. Arthur watched from the far end of the prep line, clipboard in hand, blending in as the staff bustled around him. Fiona Davis had arrived moments earlier, her face composed, her energy sharper than usual. She hadn't acknowledged Arthur beyond a clipped nod, the smile gone, replaced with quiet calculation. As the driver unloaded unmarked crates, Fiona barked. "Quick instructions. Everyone stay up front. This takes 5 minutes." Arthur stepped closer to the walk-in cooler, observing without interfering. One of the crates was clearly marked with a black Sharpie. EPCRBL 44, the same code stamped on the sample he'd tested the night before. She wheeled the crate into the back storage herself, locking the cooler behind her. Nobody else moved. Nobody questioned it. When she emerged, she smoothed her apron and turned to Chris, the floor supervisor. "Take over register. I'll be in the office." Arthur approached. "Mind if we review the invoice for that shipment?" Fiona didn't blink. "It's already logged in. The system. I'd still like to see the physical copy. Standard compliance protocol." "That won't be necessary." Her tone was flat, not rude, just firm, final. Arthur stared at her for a long beat. "Ms. Davis, I'd like to speak with you privately. 10 minutes." She sighed, forced a smile, and gestured toward the break room. He followed, closing the door gently behind them. Then he reached into his back pocket and removed his ID badge. Not the compliance tag, but the real one, founder, CEO. He placed it on the table. Fiona's face didn't change, not at first. She simply stared at the badge, then at him, then back again. The color in her cheeks slowly drained. Her hands, resting on her lap, curled into themselves. "I thought you looked familiar," she murmured. "Not familiar enough," Arthur said. "Until now." A long silence passed between them. In the distance, a coffee grinder whirred. A pastry oven chimed. The hum of the bakery carried on, unaware that behind this door, the ground was shifting. "How long?" he asked. 7 months? 10? Does it matter?" Fiona's voice was tight. "I did what I had to do to keep this place profitable." "You did what you had to do to line your pockets." "The cost of ingredients skyrocketed," she snapped. "Our reimbursements didn't." HQ kept demanding consistency but offered no flexibility. "So yes, I improvised. And guess what? Nobody complained. Not once." "They trusted us," Arthur said coldly. "They trusted me. And you replaced fresh fruit with artificial dyes, cheap sweeteners, and preservatives that wouldn't pass a basic food safety audit." Fiona didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to the ID badge again. "You could have just called, could have scheduled a visit, but you had to come in disguise. Play the hero." "This isn't about me," Arthur replied. "It's about the 10 stores I now know are part of this. The matching invoices, the vendor shell accounts, the employees who've been silenced with bogus agreements, the intimidation, the lies." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't understand what it's been like out here." "You're right," Arthur said. "I don't know what it's like to risk people's health to protect a personal profit." She stood then, abrupt. "If this is the part where you fire me, do it. But don't pretend you're doing it for justice. You're doing it because I made it work better than you could." Arthur remained seated, steady. "You're not wrong. You made it efficient, profitable. But the thing about shortcuts is they always lead somewhere. And we're there now." A knock at the door interrupted them. Chris entered, his expression uneasy. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman from corporate, Clara, I think. She's at the front with other people." Fiona's eyes widened just slightly. "Security?" "Two of them. And legal." Arthur rose from his chair. "Thank you, Chris. Please ask all staff to report to the dining area. We're closing temporarily." Fiona didn't say a word as Arthur stepped out, but he could feel the heat of her glare follow him. Out front, the bakery had gone quiet. Clara stood near the entrance with two legal representatives and a clipboard of prepared statements. Several customers had been politely asked to leave with full refunds and vouchers for future purchases. Arthur took the center of the floor. "Attention, everyone. My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm the founder and CEO of the Hearth and Home Bakery, and effective immediately, this store is closing for internal audit." The staff froze. A few gasped. Sarah stood behind the counter, eyes wide, hand half raised to cover her mouth. Arthur continued, his voice steady. "You're not in trouble. Most of you had no idea what's been happening, but we now have evidence of widespread fraud involving unauthorized ingredients, falsified records, and deliberate concealment. Starting now, this ends." Behind him, Clara stepped forward. "All team members will be interviewed over the next few days. You will be placed on paid leave. Those who cooperate fully will keep their positions when we reopen. Those who participated knowingly will not." Arthur turned to look at Fiona, who had finally emerged from the back. Her posture had changed. Less combative, more cornered. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. The words wouldn't save her now. Arthur turned back to the staff. "If you ever wondered whether someone was watching, someone listening, the answer is yes. We always were. We just weren't listening hard enough. That changes today." The room stayed still, silent. But it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence that comes just before the storm passes and something better takes its place. 3 months after the shutdown, Arthur stood inside the newly renovated Portland store, watching a fresh tray of blueberry crumbles roll out of the convection oven. The smell hit first: buttery oats, real cinnamon, and the unmistakable warmth of ripe, slow-simmered berries. The kind of smell that made people stop, breathe in, and remember something. The storefront had changed. The solid wooden service counter was gone, replaced with wide, clear glass displays that gave customers a full view of the kitchen. Stainless steel counters gleamed. New labeling systems sat beside each prep station, and every box of ingredients from flour to fruit bore a bright red QR code that linked directly to a live verification system. No more secrets behind the line. That was the point. Leo, now in a Hearth and Home green manager's polo, stepped beside Arthur, wiping his hands on a towel. "Numbers are up 30%, he said, "since reopening. And the new loyalty program brought back almost all the regulars." Arthur smiled. "They came back for more than crumble. They came back for trust," Leo said, nodding. In the dining room, Sarah greeted a group of culinary students wearing visitor badges. She walked them toward the kitchen line, pointing to the labeled bins, explaining the difference between whole fruit and processed fillings. It was part of the company's new outreach initiative. Real transparency, real education. Sarah caught Arthur's eye and smiled. Her name tag now read, "Assistant Manager." "They're here for the demo," she said. "Do you want to start with the story?" Arthur nodded. He walked over, adjusted his sleeves, and stood in front of the students, most of whom looked like they expected to be bored. "This crumble," he began, "was the first recipe my grandmother taught me. She believed people could taste truth, that if you cut corners they'd know, even if they didn't know how they knew." He held up a fresh slice, the streusel topping glistening. "A few months ago, we discovered some stores were selling something that looked like this, but wasn't. It was cheaper, faster, and fake." A hand went up. A young man with a chef's jacket asked, "Did you catch them?" Arthur considered the question for a moment. We did, and they were held accountable. But the bigger question was, how did we let it happen? The students stayed quiet. The answer was simple. We stopped checking. We stopped listening. And the people who did speak up, they were ignored. He looked at Sarah and Leo standing behind the group and gave a small nod. That's why we changed everything. Not just the crumble, the system, the people, the culture. After the students were led to the observation deck, Clara entered quietly from the back hallway, holding a tablet. Final rulings came in, she said. Fiona Davis, 6 years for fraud, obstruction, and food safety violations. Her brother's facility was permanently shut down. The other managers involved got between 2 and 5 years. Full restitution was ordered. Arthur nodded slowly. Good, not just for us, for the customers they lied to. News outlets are calling it a case study, Clara added. They're saying the way we handled it set a new industry standard. But Arthur wasn't thinking about news, coverage. He was thinking about the woman in the line earlier that morning, a long-time regular who'd come in just for one more slice before her weekly book club. The way she'd smiled after the first bite. The way she'd said, "Ah, that's the real deal. I knew I wasn't imagining things." That was what mattered. That, and the quiet promise never to let it slip again. That evening, after the store had closed and the last oven was off, Arthur gathered the team. The staff formed a loose semicircle, tired but proud, wiping hands on aprons and sipping from paper cups. He looked at them. New hires, old hands, people who'd stayed, and people who'd come back. 6 months ago, this store was in crisis, he said. Not because of bad luck, because people forgot who we are. He paused. But some of you didn't forget. Some of you tried to speak up. Some of you held the line. And that's why we're standing here today, not just reopened, but better. He reached behind the counter and unveiled a plaque. The letters were carved in clean script, placed just above eye level next to the prep window. It read, "Integrity is the ingredient you can't fake." As applause broke out, Arthur felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, redemption. The store wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was honest, and that was enough. On his way out, he passed Sarah, still organizing the volunteer log from the student visit. "Learning anything new?" he asked. She looked up. "Yeah, that we're not just baking. We're keeping a promise." Arthur smiled, stepped out into the cool night air, and paused for a moment beneath the Hearth and Home sign. In life and in business, shortcuts may look like solutions, but the cost of cutting corners doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. It shows up in trust lost, in voices silenced, in harm done quietly and slowly. The lesson is simple. You can fake ingredients, you can fake numbers, but you can't fake integrity. Sooner or later, the truth spills out. And when it does, the people who held the line will be the ones who rebuild what mattered all along. If this story moved you, even just a little, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced something that looked right but felt wrong? We'd love to hear your story. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this of truth, courage, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.